Hopefully folks can see those slides. And let me see if I can get the chat going at the same time. Can I get a thumbs up if you can see that opening slide? Thanks, Glenn. Okay, great. So thanks for joining us. This is the plenary session of the Fall Online IIIF Working Meeting. This is the first time on this particular meeting in this way. So we're really happy to have all the folks here. Let me see what the numbers are doing. Yeah, this is great. And so bear with us. We are recording this meeting, so you should have gotten a notice about that for those who can't join us right here and now. But it's not a webinar, so you do have the ability to ask questions in the chat and even to unmute yourself when we get to questions. So we want this to work, as much as possible as if we were all kind of in a room, talking about the current state of IIIF. So just keep that vibe in your mind as we proceed through this, and we'll get started here. So what we want to cover in this kind of introductory session is just some welcome and logistics about the way the week will work, and then getting into just a bit of an update on the state of the IIIF universe in this very unusual year of 2020. I will go through the group updates. So I will read through slides, although they've been updated by the group chairs. And so that'll be a good chunk of this update, just to give maybe folks who aren't as deeply embedded in the IIIF community a sense of what all these community and technical groups have been working on, and how folks watching here today and their colleagues may join in the future and connect with relevant work. And then to kind of cap it off, we have a few of the kind of interesting and highlight results of a IIIF implementation survey that we put out just a few weeks ago, or maybe 2 months ago. So we've got some initial results from that, and I'll present some of the pieces that jumped out to me. And we'll go through that. But I also should say we've scheduled this for 90 minutes. I think this will take slightly less than that, but we left that buffer so that we would have some time before the next meeting. So, and we want to leave some time for questions as well. So I should introduce myself. In fact, I'm going to stop sharing real briefly before we dive right into it. I said it at the top, but for anyone who joined late, my name is Josh Hadro. I'm the managing director of the IIIF Consortium. And I am going to ask my two colleagues to briefly introduce themselves. I think it's sort of nice. You've probably seen us in Slack and email, but good to put names to faces. So there are two other staffers for the IIIF Consortium, Meg O'Hearn and Glenn Robeson. So, Meg, do you want to go first, introduce yourself, and then Glenn?
Yeah, hi, I'm Meg O'Hearn. I'm the community and events coordinator for the consortium. So I arrange events like the one that you're at today, and the annual conference, and do some work on the community calls, etc. I'm based in New York.
Hi, I'm Glenn Robeson. I'm the IIIF technical coordinator. So my main role is to help people implement IIIF, and also to help organise the community around technical issues. And I'm calling in from Aberystwyth in West Wales.
Great, thank you both. Yeah, I think it's it's sort of nice to acknowledge. I'll thank them again later in just a moment for their help in putting this together. But sort of nice to put names to faces. Here we go. Okay, hopefully the slides are back. So let's dive into this. Just the opening logistics. If you're Twitter inclined, folks generally use that IIIF hashtag. You can @ us, the organization, at IIIF_IO. And there is a Slack channel. If Slack is something that you use or you would like to use, you can see a link there, bit.ly/IIIF-Slack. That'll get you joined or signed up for the IIIF Slack channel. And then there's a channel within that Slack space dedicated to this working meeting. And just kind of background commentary. There's nothing, we don't expect any official communications to happen through there, but if you're inclined. The code of conduct, I'll actually let Meg introduce this and say a word about recent work there. Meg, you want to introduce it?
Yeah, sure. So the code of conduct just guides all of our work that we do in the community and at our events, so on Slack, on the community calls, etc. We had a really great code of conduct and we just refreshed it. Hadn't been refreshed in a couple of years, so we kind of just streamlined it, clarified some of the prohibited behaviors, and also just streamlined how we described the way that we hope people in the community act, kind of our community ideals, as well as just clarified some of the processes around, if there's a violation. So you can read it at that URL. We've recently updated it and we'll be sending an announcement around to the community pretty soon, I think next week, once we have that ready to go out to everyone.
Great, thank you. I lost the mute button there for a second, but yeah, thanks. That's good work. And as as Meg mentioned, that's been in place for a while, so it was just a nice time to update it and streamline it and look at some of the best practices from other communities. So I want to thank the folks that helped put this together. We had a program committee that helped us kind of work through the interesting logistics of doing an online version of a working meeting. So trying to take the best of what we have done in the IIIF community for this kind of fall event and helping figure out or at least anticipate, try to guess what the best way to do that in an online environment might be. So just a big thank you to Stefano, Giada, Meg, Glenn, Andrea, and Rachel for putting in time over the last few months to make this work. And also, they'll be around at many of these different sessions, minding Slack questions or chat questions, things like that. So, so if you see them, give them a thanks and say hi. And we introduced ourselves earlier, but I think it's just sort of nice to point out. I think the way I think of this is we're kind of finally at full strength. I think there was for a long time a vision of 2 or 3 staff members for the IIIF Consortium. We now, since February when Meg's joined us, we now have kind of our full team in place. So there's our names. So myself, Glenn, and Meg. I think finally firing on full cylinders and able to kind of do the real variety of work that we've envisioned for a long time. And I've said it before, but I'll say it again. I really am grateful to their help, and not just this event, but kind of managing all the different ways that the community has expanded in recent years and recent months. So really grateful for their help and for their work as co-staffers of the IIIF Consortium. So the IIIF Working Meeting. This is kind of a reflection of you if you're here watching this. We have typically done this in person. This meeting, like our annual meeting, has alternated between North America and the UK, Europe. This year, of course, a different model, but maybe something that we'll look at emulating in future years, just because in many ways it is a bit more inclusive, or at least possible to accommodate more people, more time zones. So this gives you a sense of what this event looks like. So we've had, I actually think this is undercounting. We had a few kind of late breaking registrations from last night and this morning, but as of my count, we had 245 folks registered. So eager to participate in different aspects of the next 4 days. Representing 26 countries, and Eventbrite says that represents 120 different cities. And so I think that's kind of a nice way to look at the different factors of participation happening here. So the schedule for these 4 days, you can see there on the website linked from the bottom, IIIF.io/event/2020/fall_working_meeting. That schedule on that website should show you the times in your local time zone. We know that's kind of a challenge in this community. So we've got kind of 4 days full of content here. We do it in what we've called the golden hours. Most of these sessions are in the golden hours that try to hit as many time zones as possible. But of course, not everything works for everyone. And so we're recording all of these sessions as well. We'll make those links available kind of as soon as we can get the recording links and process them and make them available to you. So if you've made it here, you kind of figured this out, I'm sure, but we have a single Zoom URL for each day, and those went out in the email to all the Eventbrite attendees. So check that email for the different Zoom URL for each day. The reason we did it this way is we're trying to kind of balance ease of use with just being careful. We've still heard some stories of Zoom bombings and other interruptions, and so we're trying to be careful to make sure things like that don't happen. So the next section here is just to take a look at some of the high-level contours of where we are as a community, as a consortium, a couple points like that. I just I don't know, maybe this is my pandemic, 11 months in or whatever it might be, 10 months in. I keep looking at this photo and, just thinking back to the great times when we could all gather in person. So this is a photo of the last annual event that we were able to hold as a community. So it was in 2019 in Göttingen, Germany. It was an extremely hot week. I think it was one of the hottest weeks on record in that part of Germany. But partly showing this to remind us of the community work that we do. And a lot of times it just feels like we type emails and and stare at screens on desks. But like this is really the root of the community work that we're doing. It's gathering together. And kind of working on coherent and consistent mechanisms for making materials available. And so I just wanted to include that photo to kind of lodge what we're doing here now in that tradition of getting together and bringing all these folks together. So this is a view into all the places that we know of just the broader community implementations. So the red dots are just institutional implementations that we know about. The blue dots are actually members of the IIIF Consortium, the institutions that contribute financially to make this kind of event happen and to make sure that we can support all the different community and technical groups that are happening and doing work each month. So one of the things we want to work on in the coming year is understanding and better being able to better represent the breadth of implementations that are around the world. So you can see the map that feeds the data for that image there at bit.ly/IIIF map. So please take a look. If you're watching this call, you're probably interested in IIIF for sure, but maybe you've already got an implementation. And if you're not represented on that map, we would very much like you to be. So you can reach us any number of ways. I'll type an email into the chat box, but if you email us at staff@IIIF.io, we'd be really happy to add a dot in the map to represent the work that you're doing. So please get in touch with us that way. And speaking of the consortium, the blue dots on that map, there are 58 members of the IIIF Consortium. So this year, obviously, super bizarre in many ways. We didn't add a ton of new members in the last year, but we did add a few. So really happy to have Texas A&M, the Huntington Library, Art Museum, and Botanical Gardens, as well as DB Sarett and Media Library Online. So it's still a thriving body of institutions that are supporting the work that we do. You can see the full list at that URL down there. And of course, if that's something you're interested in, please get in touch with us. There are a couple different levels at which you can join the IIIF Consortium and support the work that we're doing, like conferences like these. And so the community, as you can imagine, has grown kind of consistently and organically. We use the discussion list, IIIF Discuss, as one way to look at this. So we're up to 1,172 members there. And interestingly, seeing kind of a different body of folks, a limited amount of overlap through another tool that we use, the IIIF Slack. So that has now almost 1,700 registered members, and the Twitter accounts, less of a community gathering mechanism, but we're trying to use the Twitter accounts more often now, just to tweet more about not just events that IIIF is doing and things that we're involved in, but also just highlighting community work. So, we say it all the time, but if you've got a new implementation or any kind of highlight or anything of interest to the IIIF community, just let us know, and we're happy to kind of make use of the channels that we have access to help raise awareness of those things. So one element I want to touch on is the Slack channel. So you may have seen a change in recent months. If you are a member of the IIIF Slack community, we did an experiment starting, I think, in June or July, to go up to the the standard plan, which is the paid plan. And we found that it was so useful that basically it gives you access to the message history. And there is a long history of IIIF community members talking about best practices and questions about how the specs ought to be interpreted. So we found that history was so useful to be able to search through that we've kind of agreed to support that upgrade to the standard plan. The IIIF Consortium is supporting that, the costs associated with that. I won't go into all the details, but the IIIF community is not really what the Slack billing model was built for. So you pay per users, and the IIIF community has way more flux and variation than I think most other organizations or communities do, which is fine. It just ends up being that we fall under the free threshold for some months and then end up paying per user for some of the months. And we do get a nonprofit discount through our fiscal host, which is CLEAR, the Council on Library and Information Resources. So just wanted to mention that because it was initially a temporary upgrade, but we've made it permanent. And so we'll be staying with that for the foreseeable future. And another project, and I'm going to ask Meg to talk about this for a moment, is something we've tackled in the last few months or so, but the IIIF Ambassadors project. And we have a session, if you're interested, on Friday about that. But Meg, do you want to talk about how we've developed this?
Yeah, sure. So the ambassador program is pretty simple. We have 4 ambassadors, Joe Song, who's working on creating a IIIF community in China, and actually who is giving a session later today, or tonight, my time at 9 p.m. Frederick Zarnt, who's working on international library outreach. Andrea Sajic, who's working on IIIF implementations, encouraging IIIF implementations in Serbia, and Roger Hyam, who is working on encouraging people who are working with natural heritage, digitized natural heritage, natural history, to work with IIIF and use the benefits that are afforded by working with IIIF in the natural history realm. So these 4 people are just reaching out to their communities, and we're really relying on their own kind of deep expertise in these areas to help IIIF grow. And the ambassador program generally really just relies on the fact that the members of the IIIF community are already doing a lot of this kind of outreach. It just formalizes that relationship for some people who are interested in going a little bit further and working more closely with the IIIF staff. So it's been really great to see the work that everyone's doing. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more and hearing from the ambassadors themselves, I encourage you to join us on Friday morning. I believe it's 10 a.m. my time. I'm in Eastern time, so you can convert that to your time zone. But we definitely welcome everyone to join that meeting, see what the ambassadors are working on, and just ask questions about the program. And if you're interested, you could become an ambassador yourself if you have a particular area where you'd like to focus. So I'll hand things over to Josh again.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Meg. And so, yeah, as Meg said, I think this is it's open to lots of folks, and I will just second the point that Meg mentioned that to me, that's really a testament to the IIIF community, and part of what is so appealing about it is people already do this work. They already kind of take on the role of being advocates in their own institutions, in their own domains, in their own regions. And so this is just a way that we can help with some basic slide decks, some other materials, things like that. Great. Okay, and now I'm gonna hand it to Glenn for a few minutes here to talk about actually one of the other really big efforts that we made. I guess you could use the word pivot. It's not my favorite word, but this has been an interesting thing in 2020. Generally, we are able to go to so many different conferences and events and put on workshops in person in so many different places. And we, of course, couldn't do that. So I think we took a good opportunity to develop some online training, and there's been a lot of good response to that. So I'll let Glenn talk about some of the trainings that he's led this year.
Thanks, Josh.
Shall I let you share?
Do you want to share yours and I'll tell you when to switch? Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's no problem. Sorry, I should have kept it going. There we go. Let me go back to the starting one.
Great, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
So we've run 4 training courses so far. They're introduction to IIIF workshops, and so they kind of take you through the basics to the kind of advanced annotations and covering the image and presentation. And we've had 69 people registered so far, which is great to see. And we're aiming to run about 10 workshops a year, so it's almost once a month. Each of the workshops are run at a different time, so they're accessible to different time zones. And as well as these organised sessions, which provide support and a place to work together in a group to learn IIIF, all of the training material is open and available for you to use, either to follow in your own time, or even to take the material and deliver the training to your own institution. And I'll add a link after I finish speaking into the chat if you want to have a look around and see some of the exercises and maybe try them out and then try teaching them. And if you go on the next slide. So we offer 3 types of tickets, one which is available for everyone, a discounted consortium ticket, and also 5 free diversity tickets per course. The first course in June, which was slightly different, was run as part of the IIIF Online Week, and that was free for everyone as a trial. But we've seen really good take-up of fellowship tickets, which mean, among many other things, increases our reach across the world. And if you go into the next slide. As you'd expect, we've had a really strong take-up in the US and Europe, but we've also seen some really good participation from Brazil, South Africa, India, and Japan. And I've also recognized a few names on the call from previous training sessions, so it's great to see you still involved. If you go into the next slide. So the course is run over 5 days, and we start with the image API, looking at how it works and using the Internet Archive image service to provide us with IIIF images. And then there are also optional guides on installing Cantaloupe and also creating a level 0 image service using GitHub Pages, which is another option for a free IIIF image. If you go to the next slide. And then building on top of the image API and using the IIIF images created in the last section, we move on to the presentation API, where we start with using the Bodleian manifest editor, which is a graphical way of creating a IIIF manifest. And then we further develop that to teach manually editing of the JSON to add the table of contents to kind of get the full picture of how a manifest works. If you want to the next slide. And then we move on to annotations, and participants on the course use a hosted annotation server to create annotations through Mirador. And then they use this hosted annotation server to learn about the search API and linking annotations to manifests and being able to view them in different viewers. And next slide. And then my favorite part of the course, which on the last day of the training, participants demo what they've been working on during the week. This usually involves all aspects of the course, including a demonstration of IIIF images, manifests they've created, and also annotations. And they also get the opportunity to view the guest presentations we've built up during the running of the course. And we've got guest presentations on From the Page, Exhibit, Stories, and also starting with AV. And then next slide. So if this is of interest, I mentioned we hope to hold this monthly. We're taking a bit of a break over the Christmas period. So the next course will be in the first week in February. The timing of this one is going to be more accessible for the West Coast of America, but then we'll be running them monthly after that in the new year. And so there should be a time which is more convenient to your time period. If you're interested in hearing about the new courses, join the IIIF newsletter. That's where we make the announcements for the courses. And then next slide. So I'm just going to switch quickly onto cookbooks, IIIF cookbooks. So these are guides on how to implement IIIF features, particularly with the recently released 3.0 version. This is a slide I showed back in June, where we only had one recipe approved, but quite a few in the works. And next slide. But I'm really pleased to say that it's been really astounding progress since then. We now have 15 recipes that have been approved, and they're available at the link at the top of that slide. And there are 2 further ones going for approval on Wednesday. So hopefully the whole top section of recipes will be full in a couple of weeks' time. You can now see examples of IIIF version 3 manifests for image, audio, and videos. You can see examples of what books look like in version 3, and also how to set up right to left viewing among many other recipes to really get you started with moving to version 3. But also if you're trying something you haven't tried before, then these recipes should be a good way to start and to try and see how others have done it. If you go to the next slide. And this is all done by volunteers. So I really want to do a huge thank you to the people listed on this slide. The top section are the people that have been working actively on the recipes, writing them and then submitting them and correcting them through all the review processes. And then we've got a group of cookbook editors who also go through all of the recipes and look over them before they're ready for the final review by the technical review committee. And then the technical review committee, which Josh mentioned, which is made up of consortium members and volunteers from the community who do the final thorough review of all recipes that appear on the cookbook site. So a huge thank you to the community that have worked so hard on getting these recipes through. It's amazing the progress they've made over the last few months. So thank you to all. Over to you, Josh.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. Yeah, and both of those efforts, really just exciting stuff. I think the training is a great way that we've been able to reach more people, and not just in sort of an intro presentation, as useful as that can be, really getting into some of the meat of it over the course of 5 days. And yeah, excited about being able to offer those fellowship tickets so that it's at least accessible to a wider variety of people, and more people are able to take it over the course of the year. And I'll just second Glenn's thanks to all the folks who've made those recipes work. It's sort of an interesting thing. I'll point out that I think we were just starting to talk about recipes at the working meeting a year ago. So we had a working meeting in Ann Arbor, Michigan. and there was a session there, and it was really, you know, just trying to work through the details and the complexities of like what a cookbook is, what the process should be. And now a year later, it's just amazing to see all the work that's happened, and not, you know, it is now published and is actually online and being used by people to make their lives a little bit easier in terms of best practices. So I'm going to turn now to updates from our different community groups. I should have said this earlier, but you know, there is some time for questions. We're happy to answer questions. So if there are questions on any of that, feel free to use the chat. I'll pause at the end of the community and technical group updates to answer questions that have come up so far. So feel free to use that chat box just to document those questions, and we'll come back around in just a few minutes here. But okay, great. So this pulls in a slightly different style for this section here. For those maybe a little bit newer to the community, just a word on the distinction. We have community group updates, and we have community groups within the IIIF world, which are about sharing implementations and demonstrations and best practices. And then we have technical specification groups that are quite literally doing work to suggest changes to the APIs or the specifications that are rooted more in kind of the actual technical side of the community. But first, I'm going to go through the community groups, and I'll touch on each one. There are probably representatives from most of these groups who may be able to answer questions too. If not, we'll try to do it at the end of this year. But to start, 3D community group. Really vibrant set of meetings they've had. Meetings happen monthly, and really been focused on a couple of things. So demonstrations of projects, you can see a number of links there, really leading institutions and organizations working on 3D. So places like Hubs by Mozilla, the Smithsonian folks, Google's model viewer demo there. The aims of the 3D group are to continue to do that sort of thing, to showcase best in class implementations and things like that. But I will also say that, you know, kind of the large scale root of some of their goals is to work toward getting consensus, to get the cultural heritage community and other places, other domains that do 3D work, getting consensus on how these different things should work, on file formats, on how the presentation of these kinds of materials work, and then getting consensus on what that would mean in a IIIF context. So it's not there yet, but it is a really exciting domain, and there's a lot of interest, and I think the next year is poised to be an exciting one for that consensus building aspect of the 3D group. So you see here some of the things they're working on for the next year. Are the considerations for sustainability, also intersections with digital preservation. And just documenting workflows and references of 3D materials, and figuring out ways that that it's not just the large scale institutions working on this, but also finding on-roads or on-ramps for smaller and less well-funded institutions to work with 3D and production workflows. So the archives community group. This is a kind of a topical community group that meets, I think, quarterly at this point. And the goals of the archives community group are to both promote demonstrations and implementations of IIIF for archival materials, to provide a venue for those demonstrations and for the best practices, and then to talk about use cases and other updates and ways that the archival community is evolving conversations there, and integrating those into the broader IIIF implementation conversations. So the work they've been doing and the achievements are just continuing to do the call for examples and demonstrations. There was a really well attended October call that was on the topic of born digital materials in archival contexts and how that might work with IIIF. And so I think their plans for the next year related, continuing that work of connecting IIIF specifications to providing access to born digital records, what that means, where the problems are in the IIIF model space for that kind of implementation, and then looking at cookbook recipes that are relevant to the way archival implementations work. So this is one of the newest community groups. It's called the Discovery for Humans group. And it is a complement group to a group I'll mention later. So there's a discovery technical group that is working on some implementation layer specifications that help materials be discovered and worked with across institutions. The Discovery for Humans group is meant to be a complement to that work, really from a user experience perspective. So understanding how humans can find IIIF items, how their workflows and how their interaction experiences inform what IIIF should do and how it should be implemented. And so it's really meant to work hand in hand with the findings of the Discovery Technical Group to catalyze the development of discovery solutions. So the work that they're undertaking now is just kind of some survey work, some census of, they're looking at notable IIIF sites for the kind of consistent or different discovery features that are involved in all these different implementations. And they're working on a checklist of those kind of features so that we can start doing some comparison across institutional boundaries. And then working toward some UX focused interviews and usability protocols. And the plug here on their second slide is it's not abstract work, or it is, it's ongoing work, but there's a session geared toward all of this that is happening tomorrow. So if you're available, the time there is in Eastern time, but they have a workshop where they'll be describing the work that they're doing and presenting ways that that others in the community can kind of interact, the ways that you can take some of the checklists and tools and apply some of those evaluation criteria to your own websites or your own implementations. So we really encourage you to join tomorrow if you're available. The Manuscripts Community Group, I think one of the longest standing community groups in the IIIF world. It has some guiding themes really about similar, I think, in concept to the archival community group, looking at the way the IIIF implementations work for digitized manuscripts and the particular complexities that arise with those kinds of situations, and then featuring demos and providing feedback to the community about how those experiences and implementations work. And of course, also to promote and show off noteworthy scholarship based on IIIF principles. So the activities there are outreach and presentation of demos and examples through their quarterly community calls. And then their near-term goals are continuing that conversation, working with Discovery for Humans, making sure that manuscripts is an important use case connected in there, talking about connections of annotation to manuscript materials. And so there's a call there to join the quarterly calls that'll be announced on Slack and through the newsletter too. We'll find out the date for the next one and make sure that's included. And our MAPS community group. I think this is among the newest community groups that we've implemented. And this was really born out of conversations, I think, that had been brewing for a while, but I think really took hold at the Göttingen conference in 2019. And a couple of users and presentations just describing work that they were doing, trying to connect IIIF materials to geospatial assets. And out of that came a community group. So like many community groups, the goal there is to foster conversation, gather use cases, help spur some work toward the cookbook recipes. And their work for the next year is to with the new technical specification group. So this is an interesting example of a domain that has both a community group and a technical specification group. In some ways similar to the way Discovery is working. So that TSG group I'll talk about in just a bit. And then, like other community groups, highlighting the exciting work of folks out in the community that are doing interesting work, connecting maps, either presenting maps as IIIF assets or connecting other assets to geospatial coordinates. The museums community group is just a great showcase for this really vibrant domain that we're seeing some of the most interesting kind of user-facing implementations, seeing them develop there. So it's a sort of a global call for interesting connections to the museum worlds. They have monthly calls on the first Tuesday of each month. Yeah, it's just a place for space and discussions. An interesting thing that they've done is fostering conversations with a number of asset management vendors that are working with IIIF specifications in their toolkits. And so some of the recent work that they've featured, are recent implementations, like those coming from the Art Institute of Chicago, implementing the 3.0 version of Mirador. The University of St. Andrews using a really interesting new compatible tool that they've helped sponsor called exhibit.so, which does some guided viewing work. Implementations coming out of places like the British Museum, and an interesting call about the Gettys, really compelling and kind of virally popular Animal Crossing art generator. So those are examples of calls that they've done recently, as well as the 12 Sunset projects from the Getty folks as well. And the newspapers community group, really closely focused on a particular content type. So I think this work has been really focused on the one of the recipes, one of the first cookbook recipes was from the newspapers community group, and then working with folks like Europeana doing demos of their implementations. So a huge amount of newspaper material in Europeana, other places like the relatively recent Sambera project from BPL and the University of Utah, the Viridian newspaper implementation. Future activities, I think figuring out the schedule for the calls in the coming year, and just adding more guidance that they can implement as cookbook recipes. So figuring out examples to include there and ways that modeling might be usefully demonstrated in that cookbook domain. And the last community side group is the outreach group. So this group is a little different than some of the topically driven community groups in that it is really focused on ways to help the IIIF community spread the word about new implementations, new ways, new features in the API specifications. So the outreach group meets monthly and really works closely with the IIIF Consortium staff to help us figure out ways to foster local events or online events or presentations to other communities. And so they've done a lot of the work in advising us on things like the Ambassador program, on something called the badging proposal. There's actually a session later today that'll be co-led by the outreach community group. So efforts like that can kind of help put some guidance around needs to connect with the IIIF community. So let me pause there very briefly before we dive into the technical specification side of the IIIF work. And I know this is a lot of updates and talking from me, but I will pause at the end of these community group updates. So if you have questions, put them in the chat box, or feel free to unmute at the end there, and we can pause for a bit and take questions then. So the AV technical group is an interesting case. The audio-visual technical working group is really responsible for shepherding the work that actually went into the version 3.0 of the presentation API, and spent years doing this, and is just a really awesome success story of shepherding use cases and then corralling that into GitHub stories, and then working with the editors to figure out the ways to represent those things in the API specification itself. And that work is now essentially complete. It's successfully done. We're seeing implementations happen. So as a result, this group will be transitioning, and is in the process now, transitioning to a community group. So instead of technical work, it'll be meeting regularly to support use cases and implementation demonstrations and other things that can help spur the adoption of IIIF for time-based media. So that's a great point to say that we're still looking for another co-chair or two. So if this is a domain that you're interested in, this could be a really great way to participate and help your own institution and spread adoption to other places and get more adoption of the AV side of the community. So reach out to us. We're happy to put you in touch with that forming community group. And another thing they mention is that it'll still be a venue for taking a look at some of the IIIF cookbook recipes and other ways to document the best practices so that folks don't have to reinvent the wheel on the AV side. And the discovery technical specification group. So I mentioned the Discovery for Humans group on the community side. This is the discovery TSG that is actually working on quite specific and concrete API specifications to make that discovery experience workable. So the big work has been on the change discovery API, which is a means for institutions to provide notice of new records or updates to records and things like that, and ways that aggregators can work with those feeds to know when and how to update their indexes. So that is at 0.9. That has been approved by the TRC at this point. I think there are some very small fixes in the works, but also just seeking implementations or additional implementations and getting feedback from those sorts of things. And as it mentions here, some small alignments with the published 3.0 presentation API materials. And in addition to that API, there's also work happening called the content state. And this is really about being able to take deep links into objects. So, so being able to take references to specific annotations or specific views of a digital object and being able to port those across viewers or across different contexts. And so that's at 0.3. So that actually is in a state where it is implementable, and it will still change and there'll be tweaks. But if that's of interest, I would definitely suggest joining the discovery group and working and seeing the progress that's happening on the content state side, because that'll be really exciting when that's available and implemented widely across the different viewers. And the last point here is that they've put together or set the groundwork for something we're calling the IIIF Registry of Activity Streams. So that's something that the IIIF Consortium is hosting, which is a way for us to document the institutions that are publishing examples of that change discovery API. And so that's in service of this notion of having, if not one single centralized discovery mechanism, at least having a place where you can register your activity stream and make it available and make it usable to other aggregators or other users who might be interested in making use of that. And so the next steps here are making that last small step to 1.0 for the change discovery API, Notification patterns is kind of the last piece of the Discovery Charter, which would provide a mechanism for institutions and users to have some way to be notified of annotations or other changes connected to manifests and content there. Moving the work ahead on the content state API, so hoping to inform kind of a 0.9 release that's ready for some implementation feedback. And then, engaging with early adopters, working with the TSG and seeing how that's all going, and continuing the development of the registry we just spoke about. And the MAPS technical specification group. So I mentioned the community group that has been gathering use cases and making connections around the world of places that are doing interesting geospatial work. There was enough momentum there that pretty quickly out of that community group, there was a quick creation of a charter for a technical specification group with a relatively narrow domain of work that they'll be doing. So their goals are to define an interoperable method of linking IIIF content to a specific geolocation for the purposes of presentation and or navigation. So, in some ways, just you can think of that as using annotations in a geospatial context to link IIIF material. And then a slightly more in-depth task following that, which is to take a look at what an extension to the IIIF specifications would be that would actually work with georeferencing. So this idea of taking historical maps and being able to align it with kind of a current digital map and seeing what affordances that allows for working with IIIF materials in those contexts. And this is our newest technical specification group, just chartered. I've put this slide here just partly to highlight that there is a meeting of this new technical specification group happening on Thursday. Now is a great time to get involved if this is something that you're interested in or your institution has a use case for, because the goals, some of them are straightforward in terms of just bringing the authentication API in line with the changes made to the 3.0 versions of the image and presentation API. But there is kind of a larger web conversation to be had because of some of the work that's happening in the browser communities at the W3C level that is related to privacy concerns and ways that cookies work across for cross-domain access. The authentication group is really hoping to lead some advocacy work to make sure that cultural heritage use cases are accommodated and that we don't kind of lose some of the utility that the authentication specification brings with some of the work that's happening on the privacy side with the browsers, trying to protect users from nefarious uses of cross-site connections. So, okay. That is where I will pause quickly for questions. If there are questions about the work that the technical specification groups are doing or any of the community groups, I went through that somewhat quickly, but we can make those slides available and we can pause here. I think we're in decent shape for time, and I'm going to stop sharing briefly just so that it looks a little bit more like a meeting here, and give folks a minute if they want to type into the chat or unmute yourselves and ask some questions. We're happy to talk through it at this point. And I see some folks, thank you for adding some of the helpful links in the chat there. And as folks are coming up with the questions that they're curious about, I will just say I'm really grateful. So I did a lot of reading of those, partly just to keep the logistics simple, but I want to express my gratitude to, there's a lot of co-chairs, and I think that's another indication of the strength of the community, that this isn't stuff that we could do as just IIIF-C staff. There are at least 2, if not 3 or 4 co-chairs for each of the groups that I just mentioned. So that's just dozens of people doing a lot of work on a volunteer basis to, to help make this community work, to help advance the causes of these particular specifications. So just amazing stuff. And I continue to be grateful to all the chairs for not just providing those updates, but for doing the work week in and week out. So with that thanks in hand, any questions for us or for any of the chairs on the call about community updates? Okay. I see. Okay, there's a question from Joe Padfield from the National Gallery. So you asked, a number of the initiatives and groups that you mentioned is adding the F, A, and R to the FAIR principles of IIIF. Would it be worth having a specific description of this, or is it already done? Joe, could I ask you, I guess I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question. Could you, do you mind maybe unmuting and asking or seeing how we can help answer
no
that?
problem. Well, FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And IIIF is obviously hitting the interoperable very, very strongly, as that's the point. But it just struck me as with sort of reuse aspect and the discovery for humans and the accessibility and the work you are describing of a lot of the working groups seems to be aiming towards achieving the instances of IIIF usage are fair. So I was just wondering whether it might be worth, because I seem to remember that the badges thing is going to happen next, and some of the discussions we had before, there were thoughts about how this was done, but it just popped into my head again as you were going through them, whether sort of presenting the work in that, or under that umbrella, might be helpful for people from an advocacy point of view.
Yeah, I see. That makes a lot of sense. And I completely agree with you that I think the more ways that we can present the really rich breadth of ways that the IIIF community is doing this work, the more ways we can present that in different frameworks and in using different vocabularies, the better that helps the broader world understand the work we're doing. So I would have to think about how we would kind of make that notation, but I could see like interesting blog post or or if there's somebody out there who's interested in this, that would be really interesting to look at each of those groups and seeing, the ways in which they might intersect with those different FAIR principles. But I think you're right that they all touch on interoperability. That's kind of baked into IIIF. But yeah, it's interesting. Different ones of those groups maybe have different really specific depth or weights connected to some of those other letters. And as you mentioned, I think Discovery for Humans is an interesting example, taking the UX approach to the way that IIIF has worked. Other questions that we can ask before we move on to our last section here. Okay. Well, feel free to keep adding those into the chat there, and we can touch on them. Yeah, and Ronald Haynes, who's a co-chair of the 3D community group, suggests that maybe the FAIR principles could be explicitly added to each group. One thing, I don't know if we would necessarily require it, but I could see that potentially being mentioned on the community group page if in the the description for the group they wanted to highlight that. I think a way that it makes it accessible and connected to other work. That's an interesting idea. Let me share my screen one more time here. present this. And so the last thing we wanted to present, just because of some of the interesting results that we've got, is the implementation survey. So the implementation survey is kind of the latest evolution of some work that's been undertaken in the IIIF community before now. So I think a few years ago was the last iteration of this. And really, at root, it was an effort to understand how IIIF is being used, is being implemented, the extent of those implementations, the scale of those implementations, that sort of thing. Because obviously one of the really compelling things about IIIF and a lot of its software implementations or software tools is that you don't have to pay anyone to do that. You don't have to sign a license agreement. You don't have to do these things because it's all premised on the open specifications. And that is overall a massive boon, and it's why I think we're all here participating in this community. However, the one kind of downside of that, or one of the downsides of that, is that it's a little bit hard sometimes for us to understand the full contours of the ways that IIIF is implemented, and to understand the scale of all the implementations that are out there. So that's the context for the survey that we did. We'll acknowledge, this was not a deeply scientific or deeply scholarly survey. It was really meant to be a practical effort for us to understand some of these questions. And so with those caveats in mind, here are some kind of the top level results that we got. So we had 100 responses in just a few weeks that we had fielded the surveys. And we actually broke the responses out into whether institutions were already implementing or had intentions to implement. So you see there the breakdown, 76 to 26. Another thing that we are interested in is the variety of countries, the spread of IIIF. So the US and the UK are kind of historically where a lot of the weight has been, or the most number of implementations, but we are encouraged to see more responses and more replies from a variety of different countries that you can see there. You start to get the graphic doesn't quite do it justice, but 27 countries represented in the survey. And some of the high level stuff that we're always trying to understand is just how people are making use of different tools within the community. And so one of the big ones for a long time has been the image servers that people use. And I will say here that people could respond, could list more than one. So some people make use of custom work as well as, say, Cantaloupe or Loris. But we can see here that there, I think for a long time, has been kind of three headline image servers, and we see that kind of still happening here. But increasingly seeing a number of other smaller implementations represented, and an interesting one is serverless IIIF. I think growing in appeal. We've seen Code for Lib articles, seen some blog posts, had some presentations from folks doing interesting work to implement IIIF in AWS Lambda environments and some of the software that that makes that a little bit easier to do. And on the flip side, similarly, you see some of the probably the big names folks are familiar with, but just interesting to see how these kind of break down in terms of the major viewers that people are making use of. So Mirador, Universal Viewer, the two biggest there. We didn't get specific. So in terms of Mirador has released its final version of the 3.0 viewer, we didn't ask the difference between those two, but that would maybe potentially be some interesting follow-up, is to see to what extent people are migrating from one version of Mirador to another. So also not quite as long a tail there, but we see a number of interesting custom implementations, and sometimes folks mentioned using OpenSeaDragon in a custom implementation, and so that's an example of kind of dual responses there. And then this, as we kind of celebrated the publication of the 3.0 presentation API in June, we've been really eager to see what kind of adoption there would be of some of the features baked into that set of APIs. And so, understandably, many fewer potential implementations, but interesting to see how they kind of break down. The largest set of responses is that folks interested, and the answers here indicated that they have AV content, but no specific plans yet to implement 3.0 in order to present those AV materials in the same way that maybe they already present reflective image materials in IIIF. And finally, the last few here are just our attempts, as I said, to try to get a sense of the scope of the IIIF universe. And so we ask questions about scale of implementations. And so we broke these out into a couple of different questions. The first one here describes digital objects served. And so the question there made clear that we were talking about potentially complex digital objects. So the example in the question said, gave a book as an example. A book would be a single digital object containing many digitized images. And so you see here, not quite a bell curve, but some interesting examples of the varieties of different scales of institutions making numbers of digital objects served. The companion piece to the digital objects question was the number of images served within those digital objects. And so, intuitively, that makes a lot of sense that this would shift towards the higher end a bit. Not quite a bell curve either. Interesting to see how many institutions are serving 5 million or more images directly. I think that definitely exceeds the same kind of response from the previous time that this question was asked a few years ago. And the last one, at a very different scale, but also maybe just setting a baseline for future iterations of this kind of survey that we're asking questions about, is just places that are serving AV resources, and if so, how many? And so we see here that the largest number of institutions are serving fewer than 1,000 AV resources, but you see a handful, 1 or 2 institutions that are serving kind of larger numbers of AV resources. And we have anecdotal evidence, or not anecdotal, I mean, like verbal evidence and verbal intentions from a number of institutions that we know of that will be coming online with sizable collections of AV materials, probably in the next 6 months or a year. I believe that's the end of kind of the survey highlights. We'll be figuring out other ways that we can kind of take the responses from those things and help that drive some discussions elsewhere or present that in a different way. But just to end here, I think we want to kind of end this with calls for action. We're always eager, so you're in the right place if you're joining this meeting and you're going to participate in the working meeting this week. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your interest. The next steps, let us know how we can be helpful. We're always eager to help folks make the case to join the IIIF Consortium as either a full or associate member. That really helps us, create a sustainable organization that we can help then spread the word, spur adoption, do all the work like the event that you're attending here and now. Likewise, hopefully we can spur you to engage in one of the community groups or technical specification groups that we talked about earlier. When we return to in-person events, we are super happy to help you host a regional event. We have best practices and documentation and all sorts of materials that that we can help get to you and work with you to make a successful event. You know, if you're really eager and you you know, you want help spreading the word maybe in your area or within your topical domain, let us know and we can help you become a more formalized IIIF ambassador. And the last point I'll make here is, you know, a big piece of the working meeting is forwarding the work of the specifications, but also spurring adoption, spurring implementation. So please, by all means, if you're working on implementations, let us know about them, particularly on the discovery side. If that's of interest to you, we're really eager to see some of that implementation work and get feedback about how it's working. So please let us know or let the chairs of the groups know. And that is where I will stop sharing. And we have a little bit of time here once again to answer any questions if there's something I touched on that you'd like to know more about. So let us know, and I will take a look in the chat and see if there's anything that we can answer here. Or feel free to unmute yourself.
I'll jump in, Josh. Ronald.
Right, go ahead, Ronald.
I put it in the chat area, but it just occurred to me, might there be some scope to have some organized cross-group gatherings, brainstorm and share ideas, and you know, because there are some things that cross over, but we don't always get together, and just we don't organize it. Just a thought. See what others here think.
Yeah, I'm curious if there are other reps here who want to chime in. One suggestion I'll make is, I think as we now are full strength, I like to call it, with Meg and Glenn on the staff side, that's something I think we're hoping to do, is maybe more ways we can use the community calls for something like that. So maybe joint efforts between community groups or things like that. But yeah, like, we're happy to help. So if others have suggestions, chime in. Yeah.
It might even address Joseph's point about FAIR, sort of how we each look at that. Just one thought, but there are some natural overlaps that we don't always get a chance to explore until we come together in these events. But yeah, I'll knock on the door.
That's great. Thank you, Ronald. And you know, I'll say too, I don't want to be nostalgic for in-person events, but that is one of the beautiful pieces, you know, and we hope we can foster that with an event like this. But the next time we're able to get together in person, it's so useful just to get around a table and start plotting interesting calls and community events. Are there other questions we can answer, or anything you'd like to hear us address on any of the elements we've touched on here?
Is there, sorry, will there be a little more work on a kind of introductory, you know, why you want to start down this path for smaller organizations or others, maybe on the back of all the trainings that are going on? Just a sort of hints and help. Wondered.
No, it's a great question. And I think we're focused on that in a couple different ways. One, we have a, maybe Meg, if you have it handy, we have a sort of an introduction to IIIF that we're trying to make more consistent so that anybody could give it. You know, like, we end up delivering it in a lot of ways, but we want that to be available to all the ambassadors, but also to anyone. So we are trying to develop a few resources like that, and that, you know, we'd love your feedback on maybe making a slide or some points in there about, like, here's how you do it, you know, here's some best practices. Another thing I'll mention in the same vein is we have a couple of resources. I think we're just probably in the new year going to post them online. We basically calling them one-pagers, and they're geared toward different audiences. So for one example, that actually has been around for a little while in the IIIF community is IIIF for Chief Information Officers, or IIIF for for archivists, or IIIF for a few different one-pagers that are essentially making the same point, but maybe using slightly different vocabularies that are specific to specific to whoever that might resonate with. And so, like a lot of these things, I think we have a few in the works that we'll be making available quite soon, but we also, like a lot of things, we are eager to have those adapted. So if there's a community of folks that you think could benefit from one of those, we'd love to work with anybody here to IIIF for STEM applications would be really interesting. If you have intersections there, there's lots of examples like that. So I think that's one way we can do it too.
Thanks to Meg, she kindly put a link to a general introductory PowerPoint. That'll be a good starting point. But yeah, maybe explore some other options as we go.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks. What other questions do folks have? You can imagine if we were all in a room together, I'd be pointing to the back of the room, everybody sitting in the last 3 rows, saying that you can't hide. There must be questions out there. We're happy to answer them.
I think we're going to need a virtual design since we don't have t-shirts. We should probably still do up a little design or something and then stick it in our virtual backgrounds or something.
We thought about the logistics of t-shirts got too complicated, and we'd need the scale of Amazon to drop ship things like that. But yeah, if anybody has suggestions, we're open to virtual backgrounds. So Mike Bennett from Edinburgh has a question here. So given that most of the people implementing IIIF at institutions are already on board, is there maybe some scope for materials to help them persuading management that IIIF is something worth investing in? So no, I think that's perfectly well worded. And it's a great point. So there is a little bit of preaching to the choir here. Like, I think if you've made it to this meeting, you're probably bought in at least on some level. So you make a great point. And I think what I would say is the same things I was mentioning in response to Ronald's question are exactly that kind of thing. So I wish I could remember exactly the ones we have already baked, but we are coming up with a one-pager called, in fact, I should say we're revising it. It actually existed already in the IIIF community. So folks have done the work before, but we're revising those and kind of representing them. So IIIF for Chief Information Officers, IIIF for, I think deans and, kind of university administrators, IIIF for archivists is one. There may be a few others. So Mike, I hope that answers your question. I think, I'll reiterate too, that if there's one, if there's a kind of an audience that you think we could help make the case to, we're happy to do that. Because if you at a particular institution have that need, it's almost guaranteed that someone else could make use of the same thing in terms of advocating for IIIF locally and regionally. Okay, Joe has a question. There are no silly questions, but is there scope to look at how one might serve IIIF images to Zoom backgrounds? That is an intriguing question. We did have I think in the very beginning of the pandemic era, we put out a call on Twitter to see if there were great examples of IIIF materials that would make good Zoom backgrounds. We could maybe dig that up, but I don't know about specifically. I don't know how. I don't know what the Zoom integration would need to be to take those as input. So Jean-Philippe asks, is there an implementation of the authentication API somewhere? There are a number of implementations of the authentication API. I don't know off the top of my head the best specific thing to point to in terms of specific implementations, but I know that the Wellcome Trust has implemented it, Stanford University. There are a bunch of places. So Jack, thank you. Jack Reed helpfully points out that there are examples of the authentication API, at least as it is implemented in Mirador. So that's one good example. And I think if you follow up with us, we could give you, if you want institutional specific implementations, we could get them. Great. So Regis is asking, do we have an idea of the number of implementers that actually advertise their IIIF compatibility? So my answer to that is, I think we directionally have an idea of the number. I think, you know, we're certainly in the hundreds of institutions. And I guess I take your question to mean like advertising compatibility, meaning some form of using maybe the IIIF logo or making the manifest available in some way. I think, I would say, I think we're in probably the hundreds. You know, if the implementation survey, I should mention that's a question we asked. Do you make your materials kind of like obviously available? So I think the survey data is useful to that question. And the last thing I'll say is that this is, I think, some of the exciting stuff that is coming out of Discovery for Humans group. I think, you know, it won't be, it's hard to ever completely comprehensive view every implementation, but I think the work that Discovery for Humans group is doing to be kind of like diligently documenting implementations and the ways that people are flagging IIIF compatibility, I think that will be the best effort that we will have in the near future to get a consistent view into that. I hope that answers that question. Great. This is great. So yeah, I apologize if I missed a question in the chat. Let me know, or you know, feel free to unmute if there are other questions that people want to ask verbally. Happy to do that. We have maybe just a few minutes left here. Maybe time for one or two more questions. And maybe, so as people think of maybe the last question they have to type in the box, I just want to make sure that I am doing the right amount of gratitude. I wanted to mention in particular with the survey, a really big thanks to the outreach folks, the outreach committee chairs who were just so helpful in working with IIIF-C staff in streamlining that, promoting it, getting it deployed in kind of a quick fashion. Really grateful for their help. And I mentioned the badging discussion, I think happens, I believe it starts in a half an hour. I don't want to tell you the wrong thing. But it's the next session that happens today. So they'll be kind of spearheading or co-leading that conversation. And that's a really interesting conversation that we'll be having about maybe ways that we can promote best practices in terms of you know, full IIIF implementations and making it appealing for people to you know, really advertise the ways that that IIIF has been implemented at their own institution. Okay, well, if I don't, maybe last call for last questions, but the last bit of gratitude I will say is just to you all. So IIIF only works because there are so many people in the community who aren't just doing the work of making it work at their own institutions, but who participate in community events like this and put in the time and the energy. And we know that you know, it's extra. You don't have to do it. So we really are grateful that you came to this event, that you're interested in the community updates, and we're really excited to have you at the sessions that are happening later this week, and just continue to be grateful for all of the energy that you put into making these specifications work, to making it work across all the different institutions around the world, and giving your use cases and everything that that makes this community so vibrant. So I think we'll call it there. Stay tuned for the next event that's happening in just a little while, but we're gonna put up just a placeholder slide. So feel free, or please, get up, have a walk, get some rest, get some water, and take care of yourselves. We'll see you soon. Thanks so much.